the town fell asleep. The moment a whistle rose from the tracks that weren't there yesterday, a silver note curling through the windows like moonlight that learned to sing. Curtains drifted, clocks hushed, and the usual shadows stepped aside as a locomotive of quiet light rolled to a stop outside the house. Its windows glowed with drowsy gold, the kind of warmth that makes eyelids heavy and hearts brave. An invitation rested in the air. Climb aboard, leave worries on the platform, and let wonder choose the route. The doors parted without a clang, as if the night itself had practiced being gentle. Inside, corridors breathed with lavender and old stories. Seats hummed softly, like purring cats. A lantern lifted at the far end, and a smile bright enough to guide ships glimmered above a coat the color of midnight. The promise was simple and impossible. Follow the rails that only dreams can see, and return before the first yawn becomes morning. The wheels hummed like a lullaby taught by tides, and the first station rose from the horizon as if the night had decided to grow a garden. Signs of drowsiness hung like garlands, yawns stitched between stars, a clock face nodding politely. While the tracks braided themselves into a gentle spiral, rules appeared, not written but felt. Kindness makes smoother rails, courage keeps windows clear, and curiosity buys tickets other pockets cannot. A hush followed them through the carriage, not empty but expectant, like a theater just before the curtain lifts. Somewhere ahead, the dreamsmiths of sleep were said to be mending pillows torn by worries. The promise of soft rest skimmed along the metal like a breeze across a harp. Tight, the lantern's glow settled on their shoulders. Another blanket, and the question settled too. What must be learned before the night will let them keep the calm it offers? Announcements sighed through the air, each syllable a feather landing. The train slowed, and with it their breathing, until even the lantern's flame seemed to whisper instead of burn. Doors opened onto petals slick with dew that smelled faintly of vanilla and rain on stone. They stepped carefully, and the station answered by brightening its veins of light, as if recognizing travelers carrying small anxieties in their pockets. A bell rang without urgency, striking a note that said, "Take your time." The platform offered them simple tasks. Return a fallen star to its hook, untangle a knot from a breeze, and straighten the smile of a drowsy lamppost. Each kindness smoothed a wrinkle in the air, each act warming the tracks ahead. Sleep, like a bird deciding whether to land, circled closer. Somewhere a door with no handle waited for hands that had just been helpful. Beyond the Lily station, a corridor of dream trees leaned over the rails, leaves whispering recipes for calm. The train glided through, and the windows misted with quiet that could be written on by fingertips. Messages appeared and vanished, promises to be brave tomorrow, to forgive a small mistake, to keep a secret safe. The air cooled, scented with peppermint and old paper, and farther ahead a silhouette of a clock tower blinked once, as if waking to greet them. The lantern brushed gold along the seats and paused on the place where worries hide, just under the heart, where brave acts feel new and tender. The night, pleased with their small fixes, offered a better puzzle. A riddle that only listening could solve, and a destination that only listening could find. The riddle arrived as a rhythm more than a sentence, a pattern of wheel sinks and rail sighs that asked what carries light, but sleeps in the dark. They listened, the way you listen to a seashell, not to the sound itself, but to the place it comes from. The train waited, unhurried, its steam trailing like a scarf. Answers tumbled through their minds like marbles, lanterns, windows, moths, even gentle promises. When the right answer surfaced, the carriage seemed to nod. Doors to the next car unfurled like petals and revealed a tunnel not of stone but of velvet night stitched with silver. To pass through, they would need to keep their breathing slow, the way calm people do when teaching a storm how to end. The tunnel opened onto a valley woven from quilts, each hill a patchwork of remembered lullabies. The train settled on a track of ribbon that sighed when touched, and the air tasted faintly of chamomile. Figures with thimble hats stitched clouds to mountain seeds, mending tears left by restless thoughts. The children stepped down and felt the ground give kindly, as if 1,000 mattresses had agreed to hold them up. A river of warmed milk threaded the meadow, and along its banks, worries were washed, wrung, and hung to dry as harmless ribbons. The pillow makers greeted them with nods that needed no words, then offered a challenge stitched into a blanket. Choose which fear to unpick without tugging the rest. Fingers hovered, hearts steadied. They learned that gentle patience unties faster than hurried hands, and that comfort is a craft, not an accident. They chose a thread the color of yesterday's almost tears, careful not to tug the pattern into knots. As it loosened, the valley exhaled. A breeze rolled across the quilts, carrying the laughter of those who learned to fall gently instead of gripping the edge. The river slowed as if listening. A pillow maker placed a tiny needle into steady hands, and the point shone like a new idea. They stitched a patch shaped like a calm heartbeat over the place where the fabric had frayed. When they tied the final knot, it disappeared, as if the blanket preferred to forget where it had been worried. The ribbon track brightened in approval. Somewhere beyond the valley, the train tooted a low, contented chord, the sound of engines recognizing that kindness can be engineered. Night deepened to a velvet that glowed from within, and stars rearranged themselves into gentle instruments. A harp of Orion's belt, a drum from the Pleiades. Music drifted down and the valley swayed. The children lay back on a hill of quilts, the earth rocking them just enough to undo a day's stiffness. They noticed how quiet isn't empty. It's packed with things that don't need to shout. Footsteps of moths, the soft arithmetic of crickets counting to sleep. A pillow maker tucked a sprig of lavender behind each ear, and the scent braided with breath until everything matched one rhythm. They weren't tired yet, but sleep was near, waiting like a friend who knows not to interrupt. From the valley's edge, a staircase of folded blankets rose, each step labeled with a tiny lullaby syllable. The train waited at the top, letting its steam curl into question marks. They climbed without hurry, matching breath to step, and found that every gentle thought lightened their feet. At the landing, the conductor held a ticket punch that made shapes instead of holes, stars for bravery, feathers for softness, anchors for promises kept. The tickets transformed into fireflies that fluttered into the lantern, where they glowed as if happy to be kept safe. The path ahead shone brighter, its curves less surprising, the night less dark for how it had been named. As wheels began to sing again, the pillow makers waved, their thimble hats glittering like small moons. The valley receded, and with it, the need to hold the day too tight. In the glass, they saw themselves softer around the edges, as if outlined in chalk meant to be smudged into rest. The next station shimmered on the horizon, not a place but a time. The hour of feather-footed dreams. The sign tilted its head politely, asking for quiet steps and kinder thoughts. They nodded back without speaking. The lantern, now bright with firefly tickets, hummed a note that landed directly on their shoulders. Some journeys are measured in miles, they realized. This one, in unclenched hands. The station appeared as a clock without numbers, its hands made of swan feathers drifting in slow circles. Steps were padded with moss that remembered every soft footfall and forgot every loud one. To enter, they had to match the clock's breath. Slow in, slower out, until their hearts agreed to move like sails in a kind wind. Around them, dreams practiced walking. A kite learning to float indoors, a book unbuttoning its pages to yawn. The hour didn't ask for silence. It asked for gentleness that made silence unnecessary. Each movement felt like speaking kindly to the floor. The rails ahead brightened as their steps grew light, and the lantern flickered with approval, its tiny inhabitants flicking their wings in steady time. A corridor of hanging feathers tested their balance. Each brush of plumage released memories of gentle things. A door closed softly, a laugh that didn't wake the baby. Rain learning to whisper against the roof. They kept their arms out like tightrope walkers who knew falling would be into pillows anyway. When a single feather refused to sway, they paused and waited with it, learning the patience that convinces stubborn moments to relax. The corridor opened to a bridge made of sighs, translucent and strong. They crossed it, feeling lighter than their shadows, which followed behind on tiptoe. On the bridge, sounds moved differently, as if wrapped in scarves. Laughter became wind chimes in another room, and chatter turned to faraway rain. They discovered a trick. When they smiled without their teeth, the bridge brightened. When they remembered something kind, someone said, "The rails ahead aligned." The hour rewarded practice with ease. Even the lantern quieted, its flame mimicking breath. Beyond the bridge, a gate of woven down lifted with no more effort than the raising of an eyelid. The train waited with doors open, as if holding a yawn for them to step through first. Inside, the carriage had changed. Carpets fluffed underfoot, and the seats reclined by thought alone. A window showed distant thunderheads practicing not to grumble. The children tested the lesson of the hour, placing cups without clinks, turning pages with breath. The train responded, purring like a well-behaved storm. A small sign above the door read, "When you move softly, even the night comes closer to hear." They felt the truth of it as the lantern's glow gathered itself into a halo around their shoulders. Quiet, it seemed, was not the absence of sound, but the presence of care. The feather-footed hour bowed and faded, leaving them practiced in the art of not disturbing what needs rest. As the train gathered speed, a pale shore appeared, an island shaped like a cradle, rocking in a sea of midnight silk. A lighthouse pulsed with the rhythm of deep breathing. The conductor adjusted a lever, and the track arced toward that comforting light. The lantern brightened once, then dimmed, as though agreeing they had earned the next chapter. Ahead, whispers spoke of a guardian who kept nightmares in jars with perforated lids, the way one keeps fireflies. Not to capture, but to see they're harmless when they glow. Mist gathered like shy thoughts as the train eased into a shore station made of driftwood and lullabies. The lighthouse rose elegant and kind, its beams sweeping, not to warn, but to soothe. Jars lined its base, each holding a tiny shadow that looked fierce only until the light warmed it. The keeper waved, wearing a coat stitched from calm evenings. The challenge here was simple and brave. Name a fear aloud and watch it shrink enough to keep in a jar with holes, so it could breathe and stop pretending to be bigger than breath. Voices stayed low, but steady. Each named thing softened, folding like paper boats after the rain. The beam swept over them, and the track ahead turned to silver silk. They walked a spiral staircase where each step displayed a word once whispered in fear. Touching a step turned the word into a feather that drifted harmlessly to the next landing. Halfway up, the keeper invited them to speak one worry each, and the walls listened without judgment. The words rose into the light and came back smaller, easier to hold. The jars accepted them with a soft plink, as if collecting raindrops. They understood. Safety doesn't mean nothing is scary. It means nothing has to be faced alone. The lantern chimed, a sound like tiny oars, dipping into calm water. At the top, a balcony opened to an ocean of night, smoothed by the light's steady sweep. The jars, now dotted with gentle glows, lined the parapet like a constellation brought down to eye level. The keeper taught them a lullaby made of 3 notes. The sound of opening a window, the sigh of a blanket settling, the soft ping of a jar lid that breathes. They sang it, and the wave below calmed to glass. The train whistled, asking if they were ready. They were. The beam turned once across their faces and left them stamped with its quiet courage. Back aboard, they placed the jars in a niche above their seats. The small shadows dozed inside, lit by pinprick stars, no longer pretending to be storms. Outside, the lighthouse receded until it looked like a candle someone remembered to snuff. The carriage settled into that agreeable sway that rocks thoughts into order. The conductor showed them a compass that pointed not north, but toward whatever made shoulders drop from ears. It spun, then steadied toward a dark meadow rising like a sigh. The place had a name that felt like a blanket being pulled to the chin. They watched for a while without speaking, letting the rhythm of rails polish the last sharp edges from their day. The jars tinkled gently when the train curved, a friendly wind chime in a safe porch. The compass held its line toward the meadow, where crickets rehearsed a small orchestra and fireflies arranged themselves into punctuation. Commas for breath, periods for rest. The promise felt near, the kind of nearness that quiets even pleasant chatter. The lantern dimmed to a bedside glow. The question from the beginning returned, now softer. After all this, would they sleep tight? The tracks answered like a cat settling, "Yes, keep coming." The train sighed to a stop beside grass that waved with the slow grammar of rest. Paths curved like sentences finding their endings. A signpost made of pencil shavings offered choices. Pause, breathe, finish. They chose pause first, and the path obliged by widening into a clearing where nothing asked anything of them. A bench of soft bark remembered every sitter, and passed along only the restful bits. They let the day finish talking and watched its words turn into small birds that flew away without needing to be caught. The clearing gave back a hush that felt earned. They followed Breathe next, and the path led to a pond that mirrored the sky without adding its own opinions. Stones around the edge showed how to sit, straight enough to be proud, relaxed enough to be kind. They copied, and the pond rewarded them with a reflection where they already looked calmer. A wind arrived that had learned manners, moving leaves just enough to prove it was there. In the ripples, they saw tomorrow's small tasks becoming smaller still. Breath in, the pond brightened. Breath out, the pond smoothed. Even stars seemed to inhale and exhale with them. Finally, finish guided them to a gate of woven grass. Passing through felt like closing a book at the perfect place. The meadow arranged a tiny ceremony. Crickets tuned to a restful key. Fireflies dimmed to bedside levels. Clouds drew curtains along the horizon. A pillow of soft wind was offered, and they accepted, placing it behind their hearts. The jars in the carriage chimed as if in approval from a distance. A bell somewhere counted not the hour, but the exhale. The train waited, doors open, warm as a remembered story. As they boarded, a velvet bookmark appeared above each seat, printed with a single word chosen by the night. Gentle, ready, homeward. The words settled on shoulders like capes. The conductor checked the compass, then, with a ceremonious nod, placed it flat. The needle pointed nowhere because everywhere now felt safe. The track ahead lifted like a lullaby reaching its refrain. Windows dimmed to amber, and the carriage offered blankets that smelled faintly of clean pages, and the inside a new tent. They tucked in, not to sleep yet, but to savor being near it. The meadow slid away, a comma becoming a period. The rails sang something familiar, perhaps the echo of their first brave steps. The lantern's tiny lights shifted, arranging themselves into 3 small constellations that hovered for a moment above each seat, then melted into the air like sugar in tea. The conductor dimmed the cabin until only the idea of light remained, a friendly outline around everything. The question returned one last time, now more a smile than a worry. Will they sleep tight? The world outside nodded, already halfway dreaming on their behalf. A silver bridge grew from the horizon, arching towards somewhere they knew without seeing. It was made of promises kept at bedtime. Lights dimmed when asked. Stories finished softly. Doors left a little open. The train slowed out of respect. Crossing required a small ritual, the naming of 3 good things from the day. They spoke them like secrets the night could be trusted with. The rails brightened for each one, and a bell on the engine rang once, twice, thrice, then rested. The bridge approved, humming a note that matched the soft thud of pillows settling. On the bridge's peak, the sky began to pale, the color of owls returning home. The train offered warm cups whose steam spelled their names before vanishing, as if the night wanted to make sure it had them correct for the return. They sipped and felt heaviness gather in their limbs, a trustworthy kind. Outside, Rooftops arranged themselves like old friends waiting at a porch. The jars above their seats glowed once and went out, their contents fully tamed into stories for another time. The lantern flickered, then steadied. A hearth too polite to yawn. They passed the place where the sky keeps its spare colors, and the train borrowed a few. A sigh of lavender, a blush of peach, to paint the morning quietly. The conductor set the compass to home, and the needle didn't move because they already were, in the way people are when held kindly. The car's purr fell to a murmur. Someone yawned and tried to hide it. The night, merciful, pretended not to see. The rails curved toward their street, which stretched like a cat in first light. At the final signal, a flock of paper cranes lifted from the engine and flew toward the houses, settling on windowsills like friendly notes promising sweet dreams, save for tomorrow. The train eased alongside the familiar curb, as if it had been a streetcar all along. Doors opened with the hush of pages closing. The lantern brightened once more, a sunrise kept small and personal. The conductor gestured toward the walkway that understood quiet feet at early hours. Everything in the world seemed to agree to whisper. They stepped onto the path, which remembered the sound of them leaving and matched it now with softer echoes. The house greeted them with a sigh from the rafters, like a grandparent waking enough to tuck them in, and then sleeping again. Inside, the clocks were still kind, and the floor knew which boards not to creak. They felt larger and lighter at once, like kites held by steady strings. The lantern rested on the hallway table, shining just enough to guide toes away from toy corners. Bedtime waited, patient and sure. Their rooms, once everyday familiar, now felt like stations the train had secretly visited and made ready. Pillows seemed already shaped to welcome the weight of a good night. Blankets warmed at the thought of being pulled up. The air carried a faint rhythm that matched the rails they'd left, an echo that would fade only as it finished its helpful work. They climbed in without ceremony. The lantern's light curled along the walls, drawing a final map from their chins to their toes. Here be rest. The conductor stood in the doorway, not larger than life, but exactly the size of trust. He spoke in a voice that sounded like a train heard from very far away. You did well. You learned the routes. The rails will remember. He tipped his cap, and the night folded itself neatly, corners aligned. The jars on the hall table glowed one last time, then turned to clear glass, now simply pretty. Outside, the train waited without impatience, steam fogging the cool morning as if practicing future clouds. It would go on, they understood, helping other houses remember soft ways to end a day. The whistle tried a note, then saved it. The rails shimmered briefly, a secret handshake. Inside, breathing settled into the unison of a small choir at rest. Dreams approached, shoes in hand, friendly and sure of their welcome. The last thing they felt was motion without moving, the memory of being carried across places that cared how gently they walked. The day ahead promised games and breakfast and sunlight, but those would wait. For now, the world practiced stillness around them the way a theater holds its breath after the final note. If the question lingered anywhere, it was only so it could be answered in sleep, thoroughly and gladly. The answer wore a small smile and drew the covers up. Down the hall, the lantern flickered once more, not to wake, but to promise it would remember the path back. The door clicked like a polite punctuation mark. Beyond the windows, the train rolled away, wheels whispering the same answer the rails had been giving all along. In that answer, beds grew softer, pillows kinder, and the night set its watch to the rhythm of 3 steady breaths. The Dreamland receded, satisfied, leaving behind the gentle certainty that held everything together. Yes, sleep tight.